Dante by R.W.B. Lewis. Copyright 2001 by R.W.B. Lewis. This full-length reading was published by arrangement with Viking Penguin, a division of Penguin Putnam Incorporated, and was produced in 2001 by Books on Tape Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. This book has 205 pages and is read by Grover Gardner. Should you have any questions about this recording, please call the customer service number shown on the package for information or assistance. Dante by R.W.B. Lewis. The following material appears on the dust jacket of the book. Only R.W.B. Lewis, the renowned biographer and author of The City of Florence, could write so insightfully about Dante Alighieri, Florence's famous son. Dante traces the life and complex development, emotional, artistic, philosophical, of this supreme poet-historian, from his wanderings through Tuscan hills and splendid churches to his days as a young soldier fighting for democracy, and to his civic leadership and years of embittered exile from the city that would fiercely reclaim him a century later. Lewis reveals the boy who first encounters the mythic Beatrice, the lyric poet obsessed with love and death, and the grand master of dramatic narrative and allegory, as well as his monumental search for ultimate truth in the Divine Comedy. It is in this masterpiece of self-discovery and redemption that Lewis finds Dante's autobiography and the sum of all his shifting passions and epiphanies. R.W.B. Lewis, professor of English and American Studies at Yale University, is the author of Edith Wharton, a biography, which won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Bancroft Prize. His other books include The American Adam, The City of Florence, The Jameses, and American Characters. Most recently, he was given an award for lifetime achievement as a biographer by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He lives in Bethany, Connecticut. Dedication for Fausto, Rita, and Francesca Miners, with gratitude and love. Chapter 1. Dante the Florentine. As you walk across the Ponte Vecchio in Florence today, you come upon a plaque bearing a passage from Dante's Divine Comedy. The lines are spoken by Dante's ancestor Cacciaguida, whom the poet encounters in one of the higher spheres of heaven, among the warrior saints. They reflect grimly on an event that took place on that very spot in 1216, almost 50 years before Dante's birth, and plunged the city into decades of turmoil. The event was the murder of Buondelmonte dei Buondelmonti, a feckless nobleman who had abruptly abandoned his betrothed, a maiden of the Amidei clan, for the richer and more beautiful daughter of the clever Madonna Donati. The Amidei were joined in vengeful outrage by their Uberti relatives. A group of them lay in wait for Buondelmonte on Easter morning, when he rode across the bridge on his white palfrey, himself suitably clad in gleaming white, and cut him to pieces. This, Cacciaguida says, was the city's last day of peace, and he thought it fitting that the assassination should be carried out near an ancient statue thought to be of Mars, the god of war. For civil warfare immediately ensued, in ferocious battle for power between competing groups of Florentine families. Dante was the supreme poet-historian of Florence, its most passionate observer, its most bitter and frustrated product. Scattered around the contemporary city are 30 other plaques with passages from the comedy, evoking a range of places Dante had known and moments and persons he had known or heard about in his 35 years of Florentine life. The Arno and Ponte Vecchio, the venerable baptistry, Mio bel San Giovanni, Dante called it, Via del Corso, a main thoroughfare in Dante's neighborhood with its cluster of rich and potent families, the church of San Miniato, perched high above the river on its south side, Brunetto Latini, the great humanist and Dante's tutor in classical literature, Farinata, the most valiant among the Florentine Ghibellines, and, of course, Dante's mythically beloved Beatrice. She is captured verbally in a passage near the end of the Purgatorio. A visionary presence who will escort Dante through the Christian heavens, here garbed in a green mantle that seems to glow like a living flame, wearing a snow-white veil crowned with olive. The plaque offering this image is attached to number 4 Via del Corso, on the palazzo that once belonged to Beatrice's father, Folco Portinari. Dante associated himself with his native city to a degree almost incomprehensible in modern times. Florence was not merely his birthplace, it was the very context of his being. He was Dante Alighieri, a distinct individual with a classic profile and a sometimes tempestuous disposition. He had intimate friends like his sportive neighbor Forese Donati, literary colleagues like the older poet Guido Cavalcanti, and deadly enemies like Forese's brother Corso. He was the dedicated lover from a distance of Beatrice Portinari until her death at an early age in 1290, and a few years later he composed in her memory his first major work, the Vita Nuova, the story in prose and poetry of his devotion to her from the age of 9. In the course of time, Dante became a married man. His wife was another and more sedate member of the Donati clan, with 3 children. But he was an ardent personality, and more than once, in pursuit of other Florentine maidens, he lost the straight way, to borrow his phrase at the opening of the Inferno. Even in his lifetime, as the first 2 canticles of the Divine Comedy began to circulate around 1315, he was recognized as the greatest Italian poet, the sommo poeta of his age. But he was first and last a Florentine, and indeed, on one level, his masterwork, the Comedy, is an expression of his passionate feelings about Florence, his rage against the conspirators who had driven him out, his longing to return. His entire life was entangled with the history of Florence, and that history in turn was in part the offspring of the old European struggle between the so-called Guelphs and the so-called Ghibellines. The 2 names are of German extraction, Welf and Weiblingen, respectively, and originally in the 12th century referred to 2 combative noble German houses. As the controversy expanded in the early 13th century, the Ghibellines became the party supporting the claims of the Holy Roman Emperor to absolute authority in Europe, and the Guelphs, the party backing the papacy in its rival claim. Guelphs and Ghibellines were next seen fighting it out within cities like Florence and Bologna, but by this time the 2 names referred not to the larger controversy, but to warring local factions. In Florence, the Buondelmontes belonged to the Guelph party, and the Amidei and Uberti to the Ghibellines. Within Tuscany, the Guelph-Ghibelline fracas reached 2 climaxes in the half-century after 1215. There were lesser upheavals along the way, the Ghibellines, for example, battering down 36 Guelph towers in Florence in 1248, and the Guelphs, replying in kind 2 years later, filling the streets with the rubble of smashed Ghibelline domiciles. In 1260, at Monteperti, a village on the Arbia, near Siena, the Ghibelline hordes won a decisive victory. The leading Guelph families were banished, and the city very nearly came to an end. The Ghibelline commanders, meeting at Empoli, west of Florence, voted to raze Florence to the ground. Only Farinata degli Uberti stood out against them, declaring himself to be a Florentine first and a Ghibelline second, and vowing that he would defend his native city with his own sword. The Ghibellines thereupon took the lesser course of knocking down 103 palaces, 580 houses, and 85 towers. When the Guelphs regained control of the city in 1266, they expressed their gratitude to Farinata by destroying every building belonging to the Uberti clan, in what is now Piazza della Signoria, declaring as well that no building should ever again be erected in that accursed space. This is why Palazzo Vecchio, begun in the 1290s, is not in the center of the piazza, as one might expect, but squeezed over to one side. Dante comes upon Farinata in the 6th circle of the Inferno, reserved for heretics, and hears the Ghibelline chieftain, motionless within his fiery tomb, asking about the harsh reprisals against his family. It was, Dante tells him, the havoc and the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?